You open your gaze to the stillness after the storm, and there, bare of comfort, lies the first truth. We suffer not because we err, but because existence itself is an endless series of wounds. To name suffering as misfortune is already to deny its silence. It is the breath behind everything we do. In its presence, desire stirs a flame that burns against its own fuel, chasing the promise of quenching by continuing. This is not lamentation but recognition. The will's hunger is unending. It does not tire, for its nature is to strive, to grasp, to rise again in longing. In the hollow of night, we feel the echo of every want we ever fed, the praise we chased, the beauty we tried on as identity, the ideal we upheld to swallow our discontent. Each is a mirror that reflects the same face. The world offers us illusions of satisfaction, success, relationships, meaning, yet each promises to hold the void at bay, only to vanish when we rest on it. We reach, again and again, and find our fingers curling around nothing. And yet, there is a trembling freedom in naming this, to see that sorrow is not a defect, but the keystone of our architecture. In the throb of loss, in the ache of failure, in the emptiness after ecstasy, the will shows itself. It is a patient teacher who offers each wound as a lesson in detachment. The more we chase after relief, the more we build walls between ourselves and clarity. Illusions require our faith. Suffering asks only our gaze. Pause here and listen to the quiet that follows. It does not comfort, but it clarifies. In that hush, you can hear the rhythm of pure being, unadorned by want. The world continues, but you are set apart not above, not beyond, but simply free to observe the frames sliding by. Here lies relief, not in triumph, but in stillness, not in gaining the world, but in stepping back from its parade. We are taught to fight against suffering, as though it were our enemy, yet it wants nothing but to be seen. To resist is to tighten the noose, to witness is to feel the knots unwind. Desire is a wilderness we cannot tame. Its roots dig into the heart of life, but awareness lucid and lonely can release its claim. The trail through suffering is not out of it, but into it. To walk it is to accept that the path has no destination, and in that acceptance we breathe. Modernity offers distraction. Screens that glow with voices telling us we can be whoever we want. Algorithms that feed us the lies we hope to hear. But all the while, desire pulses in the undercurrent. The promise of more connection, more validation, more meaning spreads through the air like pollen, infecting every longing heart. We chase shadows, believing they hold light, until we wake to discover that the emptiness goes with us, regardless of how full our lives appear. This realization is a small death. It releases us from the compulsion to perform happiness. It reveals that the quiet suffering under all our achievements is not incidental, but woven in. The veil lifts, and for a moment we stand naked. The temptation is to flee, to cover ourselves again. But something deeper stirs, a curiosity, born of emptiness. Can we abide without the illusion? Can we find ourselves when no longer defined by our desires? Emotional release arrives not in solace, but in surrender. The weeping that rises from the spine isn't despair, but purification. Weeping for all the roads taken in hopeful ignorance. Weeping for the illusions we embraced as salvation. Weeping, finally, that truth is unbending. And in that weeping, the will recedes. A flicker, a crack, a moment when suffering simply ice and, so are you. The teacher within whispers, you are not separate from this sorrow, you are its vessel and its witness. The boundaries between self and suffering dissolve, and you see how both are constructs upheld by desire's insistence. The map falls away, nothing is left but a raw synergy of seeing. A pulse, ebbing between pain and recognition. Do not imagine this as victory, nor as defeat, it is simply truth. A candle unlit yet glowing at the center of a room. It asks nothing of you. There is no achievement to claim, no summit reached. Only this, to be awake in the darkness. In the final hours of the night, when every thought has peeled away and every image has faded, there remains a quiet, jealous of thought, a lucidity with no content, no direction. It is the still point around which the world spins. Not relief from suffering, but relief in suffering seen and unresisted. We descend, at last, into the abode of the will, and find that its voice has grown thin. We stand beyond striving, not by force, but by unmasking. Desire loses its authority when the watcher does not flinch. A peaceful dissolution begins, like snow melting into water. no trace remains to cling to. The self drifts, untethered, into a clarity that needs no scaffolding. And there, in that unfenced space, we rest. No applause, no solace, no victory. Only the lamp of awareness, whose flame flickers quietly, unmoved by the wind. There is a moment when one ceases to ask why, not because the answer has been found, but because the question itself dissolves. The need for reason, for narrative, for justification, all of it folds inward like a dying flower. What remains is the stark presence of being, stripped of its ornaments. The will, which once roared through the corridors of the soul, demanding more, begins to whimper in the face of truth, for even desire must eventually kneel before futility. In this twilight of understanding, the illusions that once lent color to life turn pale. Love, that hallowed promise of union, reveals its roots in loneliness. Ambition, once noble, shows its face as vanity clothed in industry. Even beauty, that last refuge of the sensitive heart, decays upon contact with prolonged attention because it, too, was only the will in disguise, craving to be arrested by something external, something sublime. And so we drift, not upward, nor toward any horizon, but inward into the silent chamber where the self first awoke to suffering. We find, with no small measure of grief, that this suffering was not circumstantial, not a byproduct of a misaligned life, but the essence of conscious existence. Awareness itself is the wound. To be conscious is to be at odds with the world, for nothing in the world can quiet the hunger that consciousness evokes. Religion offered symbols, culture offered identity, technology now offers distraction, yet none cure the ache. None dissolve the restless pulse that beats beneath the ribcage, whispering that something is missing. But what is missing is nothing less than the impossible, the extinguishing of will while the body still breathes. And so long as breath enters and exits, the will insists. The tragedy is not that we suffer, but that we suffer while still hoping not to, that we wear our chains and call them choice, that we mistake movement for progress, accumulation for fulfillment, and stimulation for meaning. The marketplace of modern life sells dreams wrapped in language, in images, in slogans. It whispers that contentment is just one more step, one more success, one more awakening away. But all of this orbits the same absence. In the stark light of unflinching reflection, we begin to see how much of our life has been lived as escape from pain, from solitude, from the haunting awareness of our own contingency. We build lives like fortresses, shielding ourselves from the truth that nothing holds. Relationships fray, bodies age, wealth evaporates, and fame is forgotten. And through it all, the will persists, undeterred by failure, relentless in its demand. But to turn and face it, look the will in its many-eyed face, and no longer bargain, this is where suffering begins to release its grip, not because it lessens, but because the need for it to lessen dissolves. We cease to pray for peace, and instead accept the war as intrinsic. There is no higher ground. There is only the silent plain, and our presence upon it, unadorned, unrescued, unredeemed. Even memory, that final tapestry we cling to when the future has collapsed, proves unreliable. The past is not a comfort, but a repetition of longing. We do not remember joy. We remember wanting joy. We do not recall love. We recall the trembling of the will in its presence. What we call nostalgia is merely desire turned backward, clinging to what was as if it could rescue what is. This is not despair, though it resembles it. Despair still wishes. This is clarity. And clarity has no warmth, no anthem, no promise. It offers instead the austere gift of lucidity, the knowledge that to exist is to endure, and that endurance itself can become a form of grace. Not the grace of triumph, but the grace of stillness amidst chaos, of seeing without fleeing. You begin to live not for what life can give you, but for the purity of seeing what it is. You walk not toward salvation, but in the quiet dignity of awareness. Every joy now flickers with transience. Every sorrow echoes with the depth of truth. The will still stirs, but you no longer believe its voice. You let it speak, and then, like a child who has cried itself to sleep, it grows quiet. And in that quiet, a strange peace emerges, not happiness, not fulfillment, but a stillness that does not depend on any outcome. A serenity born not of abundance, but of having ceased to need. The world does not change, but you do not by becoming, but by unbecoming. What remains is something lighter, more transparent, like the last leaf clinging to a branch as winter begins its long reign. It does not resist the fall, It simply waits. What once stirred the blood now passes like wind through hollow corridors. The music fades, the applause dies, and the stage is left in silence. In that silence, one meets the raw form of life unembellished, unmitigated, devoid of pretext. All spectacle falls away, and what remains is a dull but sacred awareness that nothing ever truly belonged to us. Not our names, not our dreams, not even the body through which we suffer. We are tenants of flesh, wanderers through memory, vessels of longing carved by a will that does not rest. The passions that once made us feel alive now seem like strange tides we no longer wish to ride. Their promise of intensity, of identity, once tasted sweet, but it was sugar laced with emptiness. For every crest of joy carried its own undertow, a shadow of what would follow, loss, weariness, the inevitable dissolution. So we begin to let go, not out of wisdom, but exhaustion. The hands unclench not because they have received what they wanted, but because they finally understand there is nothing to hold. This is not the wisdom of the sage, but of the weary, a knowledge earned not in books but in the intimate theater of disappointment. What is love but the will, attempting to bind another to its orbit? What is success but the will's attempt to affirm itself through symbols? What is even art but the will dressed in the robes of beauty, begging for release through form, yet always circling back to the same ache? Nothing escapes this hunger. It seeps into language, into silence, into the very urge to explain. And so we grow quiet, not as an act of transcendence, but as the soul's natural retreat. The inner monologue, once frantic with desire and calculation, begins to slow. It does not stop, but it learns to whisper. The pulse of the world, once overwhelming, becomes something distant, almost mechanical. Its urgency no longer infects us. Its seductions no longer seduce. Even time, that relentless architect of striving, begins to lose its authority. Days stretch and contract without meaning. The calendar becomes a fiction. Only the present remains. And even that is a ghost. In this liminal space, the self begins to unravel, not violently, but like smoke dispersing in still air. The narratives we told ourselves who we are, what we deserve, what we must achieve begin to decay. We look at our reflection and no longer see a person with a future, but a flicker of consciousness on loan from the void. It is not despairing. It is not even sad. It is simply true. The self is not a thing but a process, and that process is governed by a will we cannot choose. But this insight does not crush us. It frees us from the tyranny of expectation. We no longer need to become. We no longer need to chase the phantom of fulfillment. We begin to witness instead. To observe the will without enacting it. To stand beside it, like one stands beside a river without stepping in. The current flows. But we do not follow. We remain. And slowly, the gaze turns outward again, but it is changed. We no longer see objects of desire, but patterns of striving. We see people not as characters in our story, but as fellow captives of the will. Their laughter, their cruelty, their hopes, they all speak of the same hidden engine. We feel less anger, less envy, less need. In their place grows a kind of metaphysical compassion, not pity, but the sad understanding that no one escapes. Everyone carries their flame of longing, and it burns them just as it burned us. Even nature, once idealized, now speaks a more somber language. The tree does not bloom for beauty, the animal does not hunt for malice. Each obeys the will, blindly, without reprieve. The sun shines not in benevolence, but out of necessity. The ocean churns not with drama, but with indifferent rhythm. Everything, everywhere, is caught in the same net, to will, to suffer, to expire. Yet in seeing this, we are not broken. We are returned to something ancient and simple, not happiness, not peace, but release. A soft disentangling from the need to impose meaning. The silence deepens, and within it, we find a subtle music, not of joy, but of presence, not of hope, but of resignation. The kind of resignation that carries no bitterness, because it has passed through bitterness and arrived elsewhere where even sorrow is seen as a gesture of the will, and so is allowed to pass. We become like autumn, full of color, yet fading. Each leaf, a testament to what once was urgent, now surrendered. The wind does not ask where it blows, nor do we ask where we go. The will may continue to speak, but we no longer mistake its voice for our own. We have tasted enough, lost enough, suffered enough to know the difference. And so, in the slow twilight of striving, we sit. Not to find, but to stop searching. Not to solve, but to witness. The world does not applaud. The stars do not bend toward us. But the weight of the will, once unbearable, becomes almost gentle. It presses down still, but it no longer defines us. We are the space beneath it, the silence it cannot consume. And in that silence, we do not hope. We endure. And now the question that haunted childhood returns not with urgency, but with solemn weight. Why am I here? Not in the cosmic sense, which leads only to abstractions, but in the raw intimacy of personal consciousness. Why this particular self, this history, this anguish, this string of moments sewn together by invisible thread? The world answers only with silence. Not the silence of neglect, but the silence of indifference. It owes no explanations, because it operates without intention. Its mechanics are vast, impersonal, and blind. The human heart, so full of nuance and yearning, means nothing to the turning of stars or the decaying of bones. And yet, we insist. We weave myths, design rituals, build cathedrals of reason and dream. We write poems as if the universe listens. But all of this rests on a longing to matter, a longing that betrays its origin in the will. The child asks why because the child suffers. And in suffering, the mind searches for purpose, for pattern, for narrative salve. But the deeper one descends, the clearer it becomes. There is no cosmic intention, no guiding hand, no final justice. There is only necessity. And necessity is deaf. This truth, when first encountered, is unbearable. It strips the soul of its ornaments and leaves it naked before the abyss. But with time, the abyss becomes familiar. Not a friend, never that, but a presence one can sit beside without fear. The meaninglessness of life is not a tragedy, unless one still harbors hope. Once hope has dissolved, what remains is a kind of stark beauty, a purity that no longer needs to justify itself. To live without hope is not to live in despair. It is to live with eyes open. To walk through the world not searching for meaning, but simply watching the play unfold. The laughter, the grief, the births and deaths, all of it continues. But now it is seen for what it is, a theater of shadows, actors driven by a script none of them wrote. Even our own actions, once believed to be free, are seen as echoes of deeper necessity. The will plays through us, just as it plays through the animal that devours its prey, or the tree that reaches toward light. Freedom is an illusion granted by ignorance. With knowledge comes detachment. This detachment is not coldness. It is not the absence of feeling, but the absence of illusion. One still grieves, still loves, still acts, but no longer believes these feelings redeem or define the world. They are simply the weather of the soul, passing and returning in patterns we no longer fight. Suffering, too, is accepted not as punishment or test, but as the fundamental condition of being. It is the price of consciousness. To feel deeply is to suffer deeply. And yet, there is a dignity in this suffering if we do not flinch. We begin to speak less, not out of secrecy, but from the knowledge that most speech is the will in disguise, seeking validation, seeking response, seeking to affirm the self. In silence, one discovers what words obscure, the deep hum of existence, steady and unchanging beneath the turmoil. It is in silence that we find ourselves not as characters in a story, but as consciousness itself, formless, empty, aware. At times, a memory may raise a face, a voice, a moment of beauty, and the heart will ache with a longing that has no object. It is not the person or the moment we long for, but the feeling of presence, the brief illusion of meaning, and even this longing is seen, accepted, allowed to pass. We do not scold the heart for hoping. We simply watch it, like a parent watching a child dream. The dreams must come. The waking, too, will come. As we move further into the stillness, even identity begins to dissolve. The self that once felt solid, defined by name, history, temperament, now appears porous, shifting, without core. We remember things as if they happened to someone else. We speak our name as if it belongs to a stranger. This is not madness, but clarity. The ego is not a truth, but a habit. A structure built to navigate the world of appearances. In the deeper realms it crumbles like dust. And what remains, when even the self dissolves? Only the awareness that does not cling, a presence without center, without motive, without fear. Not a god, not a soul, not a light. Just the quiet watcher, the still eye at the heart of the storm. This is not salvation, for nothing is saved. It is not enlightenment, for nothing is illuminated. It is only the end of resistance, the end of striving, the end of illusion. We do not arrive here by effort. Effort is the will. We arrive here by attrition, by exhaustion, by the slow erosion of hope. And once we have arrived, we do not speak of arrival. There is nowhere to go, nothing to become. Only this breath, this silence, this slow surrender to what always was. And in that surrender, the world continues. Children are born, empires rise and fall, stars burn and collapse. But we are no longer actors in the dream. We are the dreamer, awake. There is a peculiar intimacy in suffering, for it strips away all that is not essential. It does not ask permission. It enters uninvited, takes residence in the marrow, and reveals what comfort conceals. In its presence, the mask's forlorn no longer pretends to be whole. One no longer reaches outward, for all hands return empty. The pain itself becomes the only thing that feels real, as if truth has taken on the texture of ache. And so we endure, not because we are strong, but because there is nowhere else to go. The body breathes. The soul waits. Even the illusion of choice begins to decay under suffering's persistent gaze. We did not choose our desires. They rose in us like tides. We did not choose our wounds. They were stitched into our skin by the indifferent hands of time. What we call agency is the will moving through us, a current dragging the driftwood of personality. The idea that we can shape our fate is the last dream of a soul not yet awake. The awakened one sees the strings, and seeing them ceases to dance. The world continues to play its music, but the notes sound different now. Joy no longer dazzles. It flickers. Its light is not false, but brief like a match struck in the wind. It illuminates, yes, but only long enough to show how deep the night is. And once seen, the night cannot be forgotten. One may still laugh, still speak of love, still touch beauty, but there is always that undercurrent, the low drone of impermanence, the awareness that all this passes, all this perishes. And it is here, in this knowledge, that detachment is born not as an escape, but as a recognition. One steps back, not to run, but to see. To see that craving is suffering's root, and illusion its blossom. Every attachment is a seed of grief, every clinging a future tear. Even the beloved, held in the warmest arms, is held by time, not by us. And time, indifferent as ever, will take them back. The more deeply one loves, the more deeply one suffers. There is no protection from this. There is only awareness. Detachment is not numbness. It is not the killing of feeling. It is the soft refusal to make feeling into idol or master. It is the knowing that to desire is to bind oneself to sorrow, and so one begins to desire less, not out of cynicism, but from clarity. One tastes pleasure without swallowing its bait. One watches beauty without needing to possess. One walks through life not untouched but unchained. And still, the will murmurs. It does not vanish. It is the pulse beneath all things, the silent architect of form and motion. Even in stillness, it breathes. Even in withdrawal, it waits. But now, one sees it not as self, not as friend, but as the blind sculptor it is. It creates, it destroys, it reaches. But the witness no longer confuses its hunger for his own. The witness watches, and in watching, loosens the knot. Some days, the silence feels like peace. Other days, like void, the distinction fades. What was once feared emptiness, lack, non-becoming now feels like a kind of release. To no longer strive, to no longer wish to be more, to no longer carry the burden of significance. These are not losses, they are reliefs. The absence of meaning becomes a space in which one breathes more freely. The world remains what it wastyless in its unfolding, indifferent in its laws. But the self is no longer a participant in the same way. It does not fight the river, it does not cling to the shore. It floats, sometimes submerged, sometimes in light, but always watching, always yielding. And in that yielding there is something like grace, not the grace of the holy, but of the honest. The grace of no longer pretending. Even pain, that old companion, changes in this light. It no longer feels like punishment. It no longer needs explanation. It is simply the texture of existing, as rain is the texture of storm. One ceases to ask, why me? Because the answer has always been, because to be is to suffer. No need for guilt, no need for blame. The wheel turns, and we are under it. And yet, strangely, there is love. Not the clinging, grasping love of romance or hope, but the quiet love of knowing that all things suffer. Even the tree bends in wind, even the stone erodes, even the sky grows dark. And knowing this, one softens, not to change the world, but to stop fighting it. So the days pass, and with each passing, something loosens. The will still rises, still calls, but the answer is silence. And in that silence, freedom not from the world, but from illusion. Not from death, but from the fear of death. Not from pain, but from the belief that pain is failure. We return, always, to the breath. Not as mantra, but as fact. Inhale, the world enters. Exhale, the self dissolves. Nothing is held, nothing is preserved. All is movement, and yet, something watches. Something watches, and does not need to become. At the edge of everything, there is no grand revelation, no final answer wrapped in gold. There is only this slow fading echo of being, this quiet release of what once felt urgent. The self, that old architect of striving, now sits in shadow, its tools rusting, its blueprints torn. It no longer builds. It watches the dust settle. And in that dust is all that ever mattered, the dreams that could not save us, the loves that could not last, the prayers that were only echoes of desire. Everything dissolves, not in bitterness, but in the slow acceptance that nothing was ever truly ours. We borrowed moments, we inhabited forms, but the current moved through us, not from us. The fire we called our own was lit by hands we could not see. Even memory fades here. The names we clung to, the faces we adored become water on stone. Their outlines blur, not from neglect, but because the witness no longer needs to remember. Memory is the will's backward glance, searching for proof of self. When the will grows quiet, so too does the need to preserve. The past becomes a fog, not to be feared, but allowed to drift away. No promise remains, no reward awaits, but neither does despair. The fire has burned down, the ashes cold, and in their silence there is a strange peace, not warm, not welcoming, but unburdened. One does not smile, one does not mourn, one simply is. Not even that one watches being, without hunger, without claim. The world continues its ceaseless becoming. Children cry, lovers part, empires rise, the wheel turns, and all who ride it are broken and remade. But some, not out of wisdom, but out of weariness, step off. They do not protest, they do not teach. They sit beneath the wheel and feel it pass overhead. Dust falls, time slips, and they remain. And in that remaining, even the word I grows distant. It no longer carries the weight it once did. It drifts at the edge of language, a sound once charged with longing, now hollow, now gentle. The silence grows deeper. Thought recedes. There is no conclusion. Only this breath. Only this flicker of awareness. And then even that breath fades. Not into sleep, not into transcendence, but into stillness. The kind that needs no witness, the kind that simply is. The will releases its grip, the striving ceases. The self, once burning, now dissolves like fog before the morning air. There is no light, no darkness, no arrival. Only the end of becoming. Only the stillness that always waited beneath.